One. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic Podcast, episode 115 today. And I am here with my guest, Julia Kanin. How are you doing today, Julia?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thank you for asking me to be there. I'm happy to share my knowledge.
What have you been up to today? Anything much?
Not really. Just being busy myself as usual. So
Anything specifically? Because I remember you told me that you live in New York, right? New York City?
yeah, I live in Brooklyn. I do 1,000 things a day. Beside my day job and then my journalism job and then Twitter and then a lot of other stuff that I do in a day. So it's just my normal routine, so to speak.
How has the weather been there? Here in New Zealand, it is very cold at the moment. It's freezing.
I mean, no, it's pretty much it's pretty good. The thing is, like about a week ago, we got that gift from
Oh yeah,
Canada when we couldn't out. The air was yellow and it smelled like barbecue, like smoke. So we couldn't really leave. I mean, we could, but I just stayed inside because it was unbearable. You couldn't really breathe. So, but thankfully that went away. So now it's pretty much nice and sunny.
What was it like for you in your area? Because when I was seeing videos of it, it looked like an apocalyptic zone, like in Silent Hill. It was freaky, man, and all the conspiracy theorists were saying, "Oh, it's the end times" and all that stuff.
Yeah, that always happens when something going on. They always say like that. I mean, honestly, I didn't even pay attention a day before. I exit the gym and then I see like a lot of people just taking pictures. It was like 6 p.m. probably, and I see this sun. I couldn't understand. Like, is it sun? Is it moon? Like it's this bright orange, right? Like in the middle, like big. And I'm like, wow, that's strange. I thought maybe this like lunar eclipse something. And I just carried on. And then my friends started texting me like, do you see what's going on? And then I started, the smell of this smoke, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's from Canada because like I saw the news the other day, and the following day it was just insane because I opened the door, I see that the air is just yellowish, like nasty, and I closed the door and just basically stayed inside for the entire day. So,
Yeah.
but now it's nice. Honestly, New York is the summers in New York are great. Some people would say that it's too warm, too hot. I always enjoy the weather in New York because where I grew up in Russia, half the summer is rainy. So, but in New York, it's nice.
What would you say is like your favorite area to go in New York, like tourism wise, and what is your favorite like food to eat from New York?
To be frank, we like to go to forests, to parks. Like my husband and I, we're not really like partying or something. Sometimes we would travel to Manhattan, but pretty much stay in Brooklyn. We would travel sometimes to New Jersey, to Long Island, to Pennsylvania. We like to go to to see some new stuff, maybe like some museums, and but most of the time I like just to travel somewhere like Poconos and just stay with nature. I don't like this stone jungles as they call Manhattan. I can't really imagine living in Manhattan. I really don't want to. But in Brooklyn, it's kind of mixed. And there where I live, it's not that far from the ocean, so you can always go and take a swim. It's that's what we like. But in terms of food, honestly, like most of the time I cook. Half the stuff I cook is basically Russian food. So because it's nice and healthy, but I do mix something. I would do something Italian, something that I will pick up from the internet. Just the usual stuff.
Mhm. What would you say is your favorite Russian food to have?
Oh, that's I don't know, like all of that. I mean, I like Russian salads. I do cook Russian soups, which is nice and it's nourishing and healthy. Because I try to eat healthier food. So and it's nice when it's not like fast food. It's not like not nothing fried. So I try to stay healthy because it's important, especially in the United States because the healthcare is rather expensive. So you have to keep up with that. But at the top of my head, I mean, I really don't know. Um, some probably salads, like the favorite salads that Russians do
Yeah,
on New Year.
I've heard of it. I'm not very knowledgeable about Russian, food that much. What famous, dishes are usually from Russia that's known worldwide?
Oh, you know what I do cook in summer? It's called soup called akroshka, and it's made on kvass. And if you ask Americans like what kvass is, most of them don't know what that means. It's the drink made on bread. And you can, I mean, you can Google like the recipe. It's it's called so basically made on that. So you don't like you don't cook it. You just put the salad in this glass, and that's how you do it. But it's interesting. I know that a lot of people, when I try to explain them, it's like it has cucumbers, it has both potatoes, it has radish, and bologna. That's the funny thing. And then you just pour kvass all over it.
That sounds really, really
It's
tasty.
it's refreshing. I mean, it's nice, but
I think I
um,
need to learn how to cook some Russian meals. So, speaking of that, Julia, as we all know, tell us about yourself. So I saw on your Twitter page that you're a conservative libertarian.
yeah.
You do a lot of research on the Russian politics and American politics and also Eastern European politics. Tell us about your background. How did you get into politics and how did you become a journalist? And when did you move to America from Russia?
Yeah, I got my higher education in Russia. I graduated from philology in journalism school from one of the federal universities in Russia. And immediately after graduation, like a few months after, I immigrated to the United States, which was at the end of 2013, which coincided with the start of the Euromaidan. And then I also
What's
got
the
my
Euromaidan? What's that?
Euromaidan. Oh, that's the interesting thing. That's what's set off the entire chain of events in Ukraine. And then I also got my bachelor's in journalism, creative writing here in the United States. And to be frank, I was never interested in politics before I immigrated to the United States. But I started following the events of this, what they call a revolution of dignity, as Ukrainians who are fond of Euromaidan like to call it. The rest of us who understand what it really was, of course, call it a coup, because it was a coup. Victor
Funded by the CIA in the United States government at the time. Would you say that?
Yeah, yes. The best was pretty much invested in this revolution, what Ukrainians like to call it. To be frank, Viktor Yanukovych, with all his flaws and the way he governed, he was still a legitimately elected president of Ukraine, but the way he conducted himself conducted his policies, actually allowed this coup, this revolution to proceed. There is some blame, I would say, that, in my opinion, that he has some blame as well. And he was asked not as a result of an election, which normally happens in democratic countries, but because Ukrainian government was overthrown. And that's when I really started paying attention to what was going on, because I could never imagine that something like this happened in a country that I considered until the last moments a sister country of Russia, along with Belarus. I was born in Russia, but Ukraine and Belarus both were not foreign to me. As millions of Russians, I have relatives in both countries. First of all, my father is Ukrainian, so I have a lot of relatives still living in Ukraine. Naturally, I visited Ukraine a few times. In one of the trips after the first Maidan, because Euromaidan was not the first attempt, that was actually the second. The first Maidan was not as successful as the last one in ruining Ukraine. And
what year was the first one?
That was in 2005, 2000, yes, that was 2005. And what's funny, I distinctly remember traveling through Poland. We traveled with my parents via car. And there was like monuments in Warsaw, in Poland, had those bright orange scarves because they called it Orange Revolution at that time. And in my mind, like, I didn't view Ukraine and Belarus as something distinctly separate from Russia. After all, the mentality of these people, the way they behave, the way they speak, you really can find a difference, especially if you travel abroad. They're called Russians. Like, it's funny because if you travel to some other country, whether you're from Belarus, Russia, or Ukraine, you're Russian, because they're all Slavic people speaking the same language. That was so bizarre to me. And I know that Ukrainians take great offense at that, but that's just the reality. And it doesn't mean, though, that they should be united in one country right now, as it was in Soviet Union. Each of these countries, in Russia and Ukraine and Belarus, they have its own culture, but they share so much. They share history. So you can't really deny that. And that's what I think makes it tragic and unique in a way, that this war turned brothers against brothers and sons against their fathers. You see soldiers and civilians dying on both sides. It is a tragedy. The issue here is, in this war, there really can be winners in the sense that no matter what both Ukraine and Russia will lose at the end, because they lost their best sons. You follow the events, you can see that on both sides people die. Young men die, and it's just surreal. When I hear that, when I see the pictures, when I see these reports, it always makes me sad. So in relationship between Ukraine and Russia, they have been tainted now, and they will not easily heal. It will take decades, decades at best, to restore semi-normal relationship that existed before the West put its foot there. But in my opinion, eventually it will happen. You can't have this conflict going on forever, especially considering that the current regime controlling Ukraine is there for only one purpose, essentially, to turn Ukraine into a spear, to inflict as much pain as possible on Russia, and possibly start the final Maidan there, with the goal to break Russia into several pieces that you can easily control. That's the ultimate goal. And the handle of that spear is outside of Ukraine. And as such, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine will be solved far, far away from Ukraine. And I think that a lot of people understand it by now. I frequently, read comments, I read, analysis, and I try to understand what the ordinary Westerners think about this conflict and I see how their opinion changed from the start till now, how it changed. So, and a lot of them understand who is pulling the strings here. So that's what happened, and we do consider a turning point that led to this deterioration of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, Euromaidan, that started in November 2013, right? Which I will return to like in a moment, right? But you can't really do call a revolution without some prep work, right? So you can't just really bring a bunch of people to Maidan and that work was done, of course, in advance, even before the first Maidan that I mentioned before, this Orange Revolution. Um, I call it failed revolution because it didn't achieve its goals, even with installment of pro-Western administration. But the work truly started in the 20th century, so decades ago. There were recent declassified CIA documents that show that the agency essentially built a network of agents made up Bandera followers in
Yeah,
Hitler.
that's true with far right people, and they were also
Yeah,
building biolabs to target Russians,
yeah,
especially in Donbass,
nationalistic,
Luhansk, and Donbass, and all that
yes,
stuff.
nationalistic people, and they funded them in order to use them against Soviet Union, because at that time it was only Soviet Union. And then, as you can see, the same group essentially was used after the collapse of the Soviet Union in order to start a war against Russia. So the West understood perfectly well the dynamics, that Eastern Ukraine is more allied, aligned with Russia, as Crimea,
Mhm.
for example. They are aware how residents of Crimea think and how and what they want.
Especially
They know.
when I think it's 63, I think it's 63. No, it's actually 130, like 100 something, and only 63 people think that Crimea is a part of Ukraine in the UN revolution. Did you see like UN voting thing? Did you hear about that?
So I can repeat that because
So the United Nations, I saw in a panel that said only 63 countries recognize Crimea as a part of Ukraine.
mhm. I mean, I probably missed that report, but I just know that media lied a lot about what happened in Ukraine, in Crimea at that time, because
What would
Crimea,
you say, like at that time, was the biggest lie that they were saying to everybody, and
a lot
like
of practically like
what historically like makes Crimea a part of Russia? Like what event like really makes it a part of Russia? Would you say?
So I think when the was achieved, essentially the government overturned, and when they understood that what's going to happen next, because if Crimea was not it did not join Russia at that time, I think it would have been worse than in Donbass, because in Donbass you can see a mix of people. Some you won't believe me, but some of the people who live in Donbass, they still expect Ukraine to return, and it's natural. I mean, it's not like 100% of people want Russia. To be frank, they just want the war to stop. But in any case, when Crimeans see what's going on in Donbass, they probably think, well, that was good that it's not us, and again, in Crimea you still have some people who want Ukraine to return, because you can have 100% of people just be satisfied with being with Russia. But I think,
Would you say Crimea is better under Russia? People live like happier than they were in Ukraine, or would you say it's worse than when Crimea was run by Ukraine?
I personally viewed the interviews, people who were telling how it was and how it is now. So I've never been to Crimea, But I can tell you that if they say that they're happy, if the friends of my family said that they voted, because the friends of my parents, they live there. So they said that they actually wanted to join Russia, and we did it happily. If a lot of people, if from what I see from conversations, from interviews, from what I've seen, I see that people happy right now, especially that Russia still has, corruption problem, right? But it was not on the level as it was with Ukraine. And
Oh, Ukraine is one of the most is probably the most corrupt country in Europe right now. Even Bill Gates said that. Bill Gates even said that in an interview. And you got a lot of child sex trafficking. Julia,
yeah,
did you hear that that Mel Gisbon? He wants to do a documentary with this guy who runs like this program that fights, child sex trafficking worldwide. Did you hear about that? Like
yes,
about
I've
how
heard
sex
about this.
trafficking?
I did not get into that, to the degree I wanted to, but I can tell you that I've heard, and right now it is a concern because kids and women in Ukraine trying to flee the war, and they become victims of the pedophiles, of people who sex traffic people,
Yeah, I
and
know. It's like I
a lot of
heard
reports about that. A lot.
I heard, Julia, that there was an instant where you had some Ukrainian refugees, kids and fathers, like who were wanting to go to Europe or something like that, and they were taken away. And it's like thinking, and this was done by the United Nations, and they're supposed to help these refugees out. But the fact that they're getting sex trafficked is fucking disgusting, and it's despicable. It's just absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, because naturally, when there's war, when it's chaos, um, some people just exploit that situation to their benefit, and it is an unfortunate situation because some of these people that are just trying to survive, trying to flee war, uh, they don't have anybody in Europe. They don't have anybody who they can rely on. Well, some probably have, but some of them just go somewhere to be safe, and then they try to to rely on, at least on someone, on the government, and then someone can offer help, someone can offer, well, you can stay at my place, and then you know how it goes. So also there are some recent reports I've heard that the some governments in Europe, they legally take away take away kids from Ukrainian parents because they claim the kids have been abused. I think this is because of the different mentality, like Russians, Ukrainians, as I said at the beginning, right? So we have the same mentality. Some parents might yell at the kid, some might, slap or something, and then it's a serious offense in Europe, in America, and the kids just being taken away. That's this also happens, and then there was an entire scandal with some kids that were taken to safety to Russia, and Ukraine just made a scandal out of it because they said,
Yeah,
well, you
they
can help
accused
those
Putin.
kids.
They accused Putin of something like the
They
ICC
Yeah,
court.
they accuse them of kidnapping these kids and trying to just erase their Ukrainian identity. As far as I understand, well, first of all, it's war, and without parents somewhere on the streets, would you rather them just to stay there in the middle of nowhere, or be taken care of? And then recently I seen, I don't know if it's true or not, but this lady that was in charge of it, Maria Lvova Belova, she actually gave an interview, and she said that she is cooperating with Ukrainian officials, and
Mhm.
most of the kids were hurt. I don't know if it's true or not. I mean, because both governments lie. I have my reservation about what they say. But if she publicly says that the kids were returned back to Ukrainian parents when they provided documents that this is who they are, I mean, all the Ukrainian government has to do is just prove her wrong and say, well, she lies and we didn't get them. If they remain silent, I would assume that she was right, that these kids were returned back.
Yeah. So speaking of that, Julia,
Yeah.
what, like, in the last year, ever since the Russia-Ukrainian war began, I started off neutral. I didn't think, but then I did research, and then my opinion, look, I side of Russia. I think Putin has every right to go in there and neo-Nazify, Ukraine. And I think he has every right, especially when the eastern Ukraine, in your eastern, when he wants to liberate eastern Ukraine, because that's what it really is all about. It's not actually invasion, but the Western media says it is, depending on how you look at it. When you look at like the tragedy that has been going on, like with the Ukrainian army bombing, people in Donbass and Donetsk, and what are the other areas again?
Well, Donbass and Donbass is Donetsk and Lugansk. So the
Yeah.
two republics,
When
they
you
claimed independence.
when you see those like the bombings that have gone on since 2014, the killing, what would you say like is the most tragic story that you've heard from those bombings that the Ukrainian army has committed, like with especially the far right, neo-Nazis, killing people there, the ethnic Russians? What would you say is like the most tragic story you've heard? And what would you say like is the biggest lie that the Western media has said about the Eastern Ukrainian thing? And another question is here, what would you say, that the Russian media also gets wrong about Eastern Ukraine, that pro-Russians never really, bring about?
Yeah, to be frank, there were just too many stories that are tragic. You can start with Odessa massacre. I don't know if you've heard about this. This is what happened on May 2nd, 2014. So it happened shortly after the revolution and installment of this new democratic government, as they like to say, when essentially people were burned down in this in the building, in the trade union house. And I watched unedited video from someone who was shooting it somewhere just and when I saw people who had burns on them, they were trying to jump from the windows, and then those supporters of Maidan, they started beating them down. So you just watch and you see it, and it's just like how people can be like that. There was another story that I still, it's still on my mind, because I heard I watched a lot of interviews like that over the years since 2014. And there was a story also, it was 2014, 2015, when a sister essentially snitched on her brother, who was not in favor of this Euromaidan. And she essentially told the SBU. They took him, they tortured him, and he removed the biceps, so his arms were just burned.
Oh, that's absolutely fucking
And yeah, so essentially that happened because he had one conversation with his sister.
This was by the Ukrainian army. Was it by the Ukrainian
It's
army?
not, no, it was not done by Ukrainian army per se. It was done by SBU, which
What's
is
SBU?
the police.
What's that?
SBU is the police. Essentially, it's like a police. So
Is that the police of Ukraine?
yeah. So it's not like official police. Let me give you an abbreviation. It's security service of Ukraine. So it's sort of like, think about KGB, right? So if we consider FSB following, continuation of KGB, right? So it's this security service, right? So the same in Ukraine. So and they do a lot of tortures. I read a lot of reports. They took a priest once. They kidnapped him essentially, and what they do also, they often they film what they do to these victims. Sometimes it's sexual in nature, and essentially they blackmail them, so people cannot say anything. That was reported a lot, and I've never even heard once that CNN or some other Western outlet said anything about this.
No, they
A
won't. They
lot of
won't say anything about it because they support these people. They give the funding to the Ukrainian government, who's the ones in control of this, and it's disgusting.
a lot of people died in the SBU basement, as we say, because they get tortured. If you express some opinion that is not in favor of the government, of the idea of the nation, if you don't agree with the Ukraine über alles, as they like to say, there's high likelihood that you will be taken and tortured. And it's not a joke. So
Wow, that's insane. It's funny because they accuse Russia of doing that, but it doesn't really happen that much under Putin. It's like, well, you can argue, the United States government does it, to Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. They've had their history of, taking down journalists, especially, how there was this guy who was exposing, Hunter Biden, and he got killed recently. It was the Biden bribery case. So, Julia, it's really messed up, isn't it?
the thing is, these reports, these interviews, what witnesses said, it's all in the open. There were journalists who were exposing that over the years, some of them from the West. And all you can do is just click the button. Some of these interviews are still up on YouTube.
What are the names of the journalists who have spoken of this interview, and what websites can you find them?
That was from Anatoly Shary. Anatoly Shary, he's very famous blogger and journalist. He's Ukrainian. He lives in Europe because he was persecuted by Ukrainian government. So essentially, they made up charges against him under Yanukovych, by the way. So it's not that it was under Poroshenko. And essentially had to, and to his credit, he did a lot of work for Donbass. He exposed a lot of that stuff. So essentially, even though he was miles away, so he had a lot of journalists that just went there and talked to these people. He helped financially, and there was Patrick Lancaster, who was talking about this over the years. And there were some other journalists over there.
There was also this one journalist who I think was very, very talented. She has a father. Do you remember she was killed?
Graham Phillips?
No, not Graham Phillips. This is a girl I'm talking about. There was a Russian girl who, what's her father's name? It's called Alexander Degan, something Dugan. She was the girl that was killed in the car crash. She was the girl that was killed in the car bomb. What's her name?
Daria Dugina.
Yeah, she is so awesome, man. I remember watching her interviews, and she's so clever. And I remember watching an interview where I think it was back in like 2 years ago, where she was like in Donbass or Donetsk, and she was like going outside the kindergarten and like exposing, the crimes, the neo-Nazis there, killing ethnic Russians, killing the crime. And she was an American person, and they were both going like into the basement and seeing like, the Nazi symbols and all that, and exposing the crimes, the Ukrainian government, what they were doing. And, God rest in peace her soul. She was really talented, really brave, like for her to be exposing those crimes, that video where she was exposing.
It is unfortunate that what happened to her. But here's the thing: the person who did this, Russian government didn't do anything to punish that person.
That's stupid.
That's what I'm talking about. On one hand, Russia is trying to denazify Ukraine, which is a huge problem. Like I wouldn't say that entire Ukraine is Nazi country. That's insane.
Well, absolutely not. But it does have a big Nazi problem. It does.
Yes, it is. Yes, they have this problem, and a lot of people is just like ingrained in them. They just
Julia, can I just
mindlessly
say,
just repeat it. Yes, Ukraine
can
is
I
a
just say
Welsh.
one more
So
thing about that video? Can I just say one more thing about that video? I definitely recommend everybody to go watch that video with her, hanging out with this American senator and like her going to Donetsk, Donbass. It's a very good video, everybody. It's very cool. It exposes a lot about, the crimes that the Ukrainian government have done to the ethnic Russians. She interviews a lot of, the people. Bombing of kindergartens and stuff. It's absolutely messed up. It's just, but anyways, like you were saying, Julia, sorry about that. Just, I like that video she did. Anyways, keep going.
Yeah. So, so Russia does not really punish them. I mean, at least that the person who committed that crime, because it's terrorism, right? They essentially blew up her car in Moscow. I think in Moscow or near Moscow, and then Russia didn't even bother to just issue international warrant or something. So they figured out who did it in like within a day, and then nothing. You see, that's my issue here. So Russia is trying to denazify Ukraine, and then what Russia was doing for the past 8 years? That's my question, because I've seen this strategy. I watched.
So you think that Putin should have gone in earlier? Because a lot of people do say that. A lot of people do think he should have gone in earlier. He should have sorted it, because if anything, maybe he should have, because especially with all this shit going on, it's just like, part of my language, especially with all this evilness going on of ethnic Russians dying,
The thing is, there is a huge debate in Russia, and it has been going on for a year. Should have Russia entered Ukraine back then, in 2014, and just prevented all this loss and tragedy? Or Russia just should have stayed away, and that was the right time. 2022, that was the right time. And so some people would say, well, Russia wasn't ready in 2014, because when Russia took Crimea, there were so many sanctions that it could have crippled Russia, right? So, and a lot of proponents of that idea, they say, well, no, Russia could not do that, couldn't have done that in 14. It was absolutely impossible. But keep in mind, at that time, Ukrainian army wasn't ready either, meaning that they didn't have an army. Well, they had, but it was not on. It was not on the level as it is right now. Right now, it's, as Prigozhin says, it is like second army in the world. It's probably not second, but they're well armed.
You're talking about the Russian army?
No, Ukrainian army.
The second most powerful one.
Well, that's what Prigozhin says. I'm not saying that Ukrainian army is the second army right now.
Oh, they're definitely not. In my opinion, I would say, of course, United States is still on top, but I would say China's second, Russia's third, and yeah, keep going like you were saying, Julia.
Yeah. So, and at the same time, a lot of people say, well, if 2022 was the right time, then essentially Russia allowed for 8 years, just watch Donbass bleed while Ukrainian army trained and for the battle. So what is better? I don't know the answer to that question. In my opinion, if Putin, that KGB agent, he's wise, he's he knows his stuff. Probably there was a third way. Probably he could have outsmarted them all. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And now Russian soldiers just pay the price with blood. And people still die. Civilians still die.
Yep. That is true,
on
but
both sides. Because if you look at what happens in Belgorod, and Donbass is
Belgrade.
constantly being shot. Still,
Is it Belgrade or
still.
Belgrade? But sorry, Belgrade.
Oh no,
Sorry,
no, it's
my
it's
pronunciation.
it's Belgorod, because
Belgrade.
no, Belgrade. It's
I thought
another
you were
city.
bringing up a Yugoslavia reference for a second, but anyways, like you were saying,
Yeah. So, and Donbass is still being shelled constantly. Constantly, people die, and the what is mind-boggling to me. CNN, like I keep bringing them up because it's one of the Western media, but none of them just show when the rocket just hits the market or a bus
no,
station,
they
and
don't.
they're no soldiers; they're just people. And if they were objective, if they want to claim that Russia is ruthless, that Russia just barged Ukraine with its rockets and people die, and that happens, by the way, that happens, people die, but at least you could have shown what happens in Donbass. But there's nothing,
Um, Julia, what
absolutely
is your
nothing. They don't
Julia?
show it, and I became disappointed.
Julia, I got a question for you. What is your opinion on the fact that Ukraine has just named a street like recently after a Nazi? What is your also opinion like on the fact, that Ukraine has a big neo-Nazi problem, that is a big neo-Nazi problem, especially in the government, and President Zelensky, they say he's a Jewish, but yet he sides with a lot of, these neo-Nazis, and he praised, someone, at that time, he praised like a Nazi guy who was in the German
Yeah,
army at that
with
time,
regard,
I'm sorry, I'm not done yet. Sorry, I was just saying. And what is your
yeah,
opinion on the fact, that the
sure.
Ukrainian army doesn't ban any of these neo-Nazi groups, but then Russia, though, has actually banned a lot of its neo-Nazi groups, like the United Slavic Party, this party, that party. What is your opinion to that? Especially, when Russia has, especially when the Western media says that Russia, especially when there's a lot of, NATO people say that Russia has a neo-Nazi problem, especially even though Russia has banned a lot of its neo-Nazi parties group, and the fact that Russia actually has a holiday that celebrates the victory over the Nazis in 1945, but then the West claims, oh, this, but yet the West and Ukraine doesn't actually have a holiday that celebrates that. What is your opinions on that?
Yeah, so Russia, so I will just address it. Russia did have that problem at the very beginning, but you have to understand that Russia was coming off of this wild 90s period with just absolute chaos. Imagine that the Soviet Union collapsed, and then everything would just went wild. So, and for the 10, probably until Putin came to power, it was a very difficult time. And of course, elements like that, who are nationalists in nature, they were appearing here and there, and then Russia got a hold of it. So they pretty much, tone it down, and they I wouldn't say they got rid of them completely. If I there probably some Nazis in Russia. There probably some Nazis in every countries. To be
Oh yeah,
frank,
absolutely. There's neo-Nazis in
with
America. There's neo-Nazis.
yeah, with some ideas like that. But a lot of people just ask, well, when you say about Ukraine, it's just full of Nazis. Like, do you think like all Ukraine is a Nazi? The short answer is no, because we also can understand the type of Nazism that is currently manifested in Ukraine is different from Nazism in Third Reich. So the tenets are similar. So, for example, they like to say Ukraine ponad uсе, so which means Ukraine above else. Or they also say something like "Пам'ятай чужинець, десь господар українець," what can be translated into "remember foreigner, a Ukrainian is the master here." And that just always existed there. So, I mean, we can't really deny in World War II, Western Ukraine, a lot of Western Ukrainians, they were supporting Nazis.
Yeah, and they also
They
welcomed a lot of the Nazis, like Stefan Bandera also
course.
was, collaborator too.
Yeah, so a lot of Ukrainians, they just claim, well, they were fighting for liberation of Ukraine, and whoever helped them, well, that's what it is. No, they actually killed a lot of Jewish people and a lot of Poles and Russians, and they did it so ruthlessly. I'm not gonna tell you right now the details. You can read about this, but if you just read what Bandera followers have been doing, the way they killed people, killed kids, women, elderly,
Mhm.
it's just like it can give you nightmares. When I read about this, I'm like, well, how a person can do something like this.
I was reading. I saw a video by
And
this.
when there's another street named,
Sorry, Julia, say it again.
yeah, so and so you see these state sanctions parades. For example, there is essentially SS marches in Lviv, right? So I mean, you can't deny that, some of them display swastika. So I would say can see swastika everywhere you go in Ukraine. But even from the Western reports, there's so many of them doing this Hitler salute. A lot of them just wear this, German Nazi signs, and I'm like, well, why so many? Why so many? You can't find even one on Russians, and you find here. And if you've seen these videos and pictures when Russia captured some of the prisoners of war, right? The soldiers, and they undress them, and a lot of them has this swastika or Hitler portrait tattooed on them, and for me, it's just wild for the country that actually fought Nazism, because Ukraine took part in World War II, and they lost so many people. By the way, Zelensky grandfather is probably just turning into his grave, seeing what his grandson is doing right now. So,
I
and
know his grandson
when
is.
they just whitewash, yeah, so grandfather of Zelensky, he was a war hero. And when you see how they whitewash Azov, when who was at the beginning of Azov, someone named Biletsky, right? So I'll tell you, Biletsky's ideas. I'm not gonna read them out loud right now. You can also read it because it's not really appropriate. But it's so anti-Semitic and so in tune, in line with what Nazis, like truly real Nazis, were saying. And then that person takes part in these parades. They invite him to open the streets in the name of Azov and of Bandera. And like, I see it and like, okay, how the country just can turn in a few years turn into worshiping that stuff. I understand when youngsters do that because they grew up in Ukraine. They didn't grow up in Soviet Union, but a lot of elderly and people who were born in Soviet Union, who who studied in Soviet Union, they knew history, and now all of a sudden they support all that stuff. How cannot they cannot see the what's going on in Ukraine with Azov, with swastikas, with this parades, the way they show the way they celebrate Bandera's birthday. You can just see it. I think his birthday is January 1st, and on January 1st they just have this with tiki torches. When that happened Charlottesville, I think, in United States, they freaked out and they said, "Well, this is anti-Semitic. This is white supremacy." But when that happens in Ukraine, it's fine. Like, why
Yeah,
there's
I
a double
know.
standard? Why there's a double standard? And I'm
Well,
still people who grew up in Soviet Union who remembered, the stories their grandparents were telling about the World War II. A lot of them had relatives, and what it mean to have the world at the brink of destruction, and they should know what's the difference between good and evil, and it's absolutely shame.
I
And
know.
so I mean, it's just when I hear that they name another street, I'm like, okay, well, it's another day. What else is new? Because I got used to it. We got used to it. That's the problem. We got used to it. There's so many streets named in Bandera and some other Nazi collaborators, and I just I just see absolute silence from Poland government, from Israel, and I'm like,
I know countries that are Israel, which should be
how can
speaking
this
against
happen?
us, especially when it's full of Jews. They should be calling this out, and they should be condemning President Zelensky for doing this. It's just like, and going
Yeah,
back to this, Julia, there's another thing that just came out, where I saw, that there was a movie called Hatred, which came out in 2016, and it talks about, the Ukrainian Nazis that were going around a village in, what's it called? Starts with
Volin,
V.
Volin,
Feeling about how they were going
Volin.
on killing, some of the Polish people there. And President Zelensky, you would think, would acknowledge
Yeah,
and, would apologize to the
yes,
Polish people, but yet he doesn't. He ignores the fact the Ukrainian and a lot of Polish people wish, the Ukrainian government would apologize for the atrocity that they committed against, the Polish back then, and it's funny how Poland, is good friends of Ukraine, but yet they ignore the fact Ukrainians,
yeah, yeah.
you get what I mean.
I watched that movie a few weeks ago, I think, and it's history, and it happened. And when you try to rewrite history, nothing will come out of it. And the way Russians view it, because I screen all of this, Telegram channels and Twitter and everything, and I want to understand, I want to get a sense of what people think. And you know what Russians are saying, like regular ordinary Russians? They say, well, 80 years passed and we have German tanks on our ground burning again. Well, I guess it's our turn to take care
Yeah, I know that meme.
of it. You know, and it could have been avoided, honestly, and it should have, because we don't realize the tragedy that Ukraine will see in a few years, when a lot of people fled, some of them to Russia, by the way, to the point that when they say, well, it's with Russia who was bombing Donbass, then why residents of Donbass fled to Russia? Kind of counterproductive, no? So, and a lot of women and children that left to Europe, some to America, some to
And
other.
a lot of them moved to Poland, and it's
Yeah,
actually because a lot of the refugees are moving
yeah,
to Poland. It's
yeah.
actually destroying Poland's economy at the moment. Well, their welfare system.
Not many will return back. That's a loss for Ukraine. A lot of men are dying. Young men are dying.
Yeah,
What's
more.
going to happen? It's going to be demographical, demographic tragedy in a few years. I don't think that Ukraine will ever be the same.
It won't. Julia, I got a question for you. Some people say that because obviously, a lot of media outlets have came out and said that Ukraine is losing the war. Ukraine has lost 200,000 people, if that's correct. Maybe 20,000 or something, I don't know. But they're losing the war. Their army is getting completely overshadowed by Russia. Russia's, winning the war big time. I mean, even though in your view, Russia, it is a loss for Russia because they are losing civilians too. some people, I've seen some interesting maps on Twitter where some people say that, Eastern Ukraine, let's say in the year 2024, Russia's declared victory, Eastern Ukraine has become part of Russia, and Western Ukraine is this, and Western Ukraine will be its own deciders, and South Ukraine might, be taken over by Poland or like Moldova. Some people have that opinion. How do you see it ending? Do you think, Russia's going to get victory, or do you think that Ukraine's going to split? And if it does split, like what's going to happen to Western Ukraine? Do you think it's going to be like some kind of dump, that's just going to be no hope of returning? And how do you think that Eastern Ukraine will?
So just to quickly address that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. To address that last part, I think that Ukraine will be split in three parts. Eastern part will join Russia, and Western part most likely will join Poland. Maybe some small part will join Hungary, and then there will be Central Ukraine.
Moldova.
I don't think that Moldova has something to do with that. I think it's going to be Poland and Hungary. By the way, in the Western Ukraine, there's a lot of people with Hungarian passports, and they speak Hungarian, and they have Hungarian schools. They were not super happy when Ukraine started just cracking down on the teachings in other languages. So, and especially like recently, a lot of conscripts were of Hungarian descent, and Hungary actually, made a protest of it. They said to Ukrainians, like, what are you doing? Why would you take them? But anyway, it's my personal belief that Poland will still take the western part of Ukraine. Will we see it in a few years? I don't know. Will it happen? I don't know. With regard to the, I'd say it's premature to say. I see a lot of people in the West who are pro-Russia. They're very euphoric. I see this euphoria in a lot of Russian-led Telegram channels and publics. I read them all, and all of them are just like, "Oh, it's going smooth. Ukraine is losing." It is premature to say, because I read and listen to people who are actually doing the work, who speak publicly, and they have some knowledge. For example, Tatiana is a very famous Ukrainian lawyer. She has been living in Donbass for some time and actually helping people. And she invites on her podcast a lot of guests who actually doing the work. And they just I would say they're pessimistic a little bit, because unfortunately Russian government did not provide everything to the Russian army as it was supposed to. A lot of people, just ordinary Russians, just collect money and send to the front, send for simple things as shoes, as ammunition, as some tools that's needed, drones, and everything else. Something that Russian government that collects a lot of money, and they sell all oil, gas, and everything. But unfortunately, it just when I say that Ukraine and Russia are like sister countries, when Ukraine is corrupt, Russia is also corrupt. That's just the reality. And I'm saying as a Russian, I'm not gonna just sugarcoat it. It is what it is. And with the way they provide it, with the way the generals, Shoigu, Gerasimov, the way they operate in the front, it's also very unfortunate. I'm not going to entertain that. I'm not going to say that Prigozhin is right all the time, right? The Wagner leader, right? But I find that Prigozhin says a lot of things what people who have been on the front have been saying for months. And Prigozhin is only saying about this now, about issues. So it's very premature to say that Russia is winning. Obviously, Russia stands the ground, right? So obviously, you can see even from the Western reports, when they tone it down, you can pretty much read about everything else except Ukraine. It means that things are not going well in Ukraine. So that's also a sign. Some of these tanks, the Bradleys and Leopard, they have been destroyed. So that gave some boost, to Russian soldiers. They were demoralized by losses and how it went in Bakhmut. But unfortunately, a lot of them are dying. They are not well equipped in terms of munitions and just basic stuff that soldiers need. And it's been reported for months at this end. So I mean, a lot of Westerners who follow this war, they either ignore it or just this. But some of the complaints that Prigozhin say, actually, it is true. So it's really early to say. Things can turn in a second. So we'll see how it goes, but I think that it will go the same way as it went with other countries that had the artificial government installed. When support is cut off, because you understand, like Ukraine right now is not, so it is on the support, fully supported by the West, by a bunch of countries that Russia is trying to fight at the same time. And if you cut off that support, what's going to happen? No pensions, no salaries, no munitions, no weapons, nothing.
Yeah, and they're running out of that right now. The West is running. Yeah, the West is running out of that. Russia's overpowering their weapons. It's just, but at the end of the day, Julia, it's because they don't. So, Julia? Sorry if I've changed the subject a bit. Is that okay? You there? Hello?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So think about this for a minute. The elitists and the bankers who are funding the Ukrainians don't care if Ukraine win. It's just like, Taiwan and China. If Taiwan and China were to go to war, they wouldn't care if the Taiwanese, were to lose the war. All they care about is the money. Because sooner or later, they're going to realize the Ukrainian war, Ukraine's losing the war, and they probably realize that. And as soon as they can't make money out of it, they won't care if Russia takes Ukraine. They won't. They just don't care.
Yeah, that's the reality that Ukrainians will face in a few months or a few years. We don't know, right? But at the end of the day, they don't care if Ukrainians die. They don't.
Nope.
On the other hand,
the bankers.
Let me add very important.
No, go ahead. Yep.
Thing. On the other hand, in the past few months, Russian elites, they also don't particularly care if Russian soldiers die. That's an unfortunate thing.
Yep. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
So the Russian elites, they also don't particularly care if Russian soldiers die. And some of them, you'd be surprised, some of them want Russia to lose the war. You know why? Traveling to Western countries, shipping money offshore, a lot of their kids, wives, mistresses in the NATO countries, they have properties in NATO countries. And this war kind of, puts them in a pickle. So they would be fine if Russia loses that war. That's the scary thought. And for me as a Russian, listen, I'm not fond of the Russian government per se. I'm just put it right here. But I still love my home country because I grew up there, and I don't want it to collapse and just and just don't exist anymore. At the same time, there are a lot of people in powerful positions that would rather sell Russia out. Same way as a bunch of Ukrainians a few years ago sold out Ukraine, because that's what they did. You think that all this money that go from the West and munitions and everything. You think that all goes to the front? No, some of it goes offshore, and a lot of people actually, got rich, Zelensky included, by the way.
Some
So,
people call him the biggest grifter of all time.
Zelensky is not the only one there. That's the thing. If you heard reports about Reznikov, so Reznikov is just, I don't know, he stole so much that I don't know, but I think Americans will take care of that, because there is department called NABU. It's staffed by Americans, and they presumably supposed to fight corruption in Ukraine, and they let some things slide, but they're gonna take care of it because at the end of the day, it's American taxpayers' money, and that's not gonna go unpunished. And the Zelensky regime, they know about this. No, they fully understand, but they can't stop just stealing all that stuff because it's never been better. While regular Ukrainians are dying on the front, they just keep partying on and just steal the money from the taxpayers. By the way, there was a report just yesterday. I think like $6 billion that was an accounting error made by
Yeah,
Pentagon.
the Pentagon.
So they accidentally sent extra 6 billion. Like, can you imagine that?
To be honest, I don't think it was an error. I think they did it on purpose, knowing how like evil they are. It's just, it's really
I'm just
weird.
surprised that they publicly just said it. I mean, at the end of the day, that everyone I think understood by this time that all this money, all this financial aid, it was just laundering right through Ukraine.
Mm.
And then it's just, I think it's aggravating for people just to see, well, it's just a mistake, $100. It's a lot of money, um, and that's unfortunate, but
Yeah. So, so you say you're not a fan of the Russian government.
yeah.
What would you say that Vladimir Putin is doing to fight, the corruption of the Russian government? Because a long time ago, I saw a video when he came into power. He kicked out a lot of the globalist bankers from the Kremlin. He kicked out a lot of the Zionists that were corrupting Russia. He turned Russia from an economic dump to an economic, developing nation. What would you say? How do you view Putin? Do you think he's a good president? And what would you say, what he's doing good to fight these elitists against Russia? And what would you say is your favorite policy that he's brought in?
He doesn't do enough. That's just in my opinion. First of all, it's been a very long time since he became president, right? So it's been
He
more than
was
3 years.
he 2000. Remember, he wasn't president from 2012. That was someone else. Can't remember who it was, and then he came back.
Technically, I mean, that was yes, that was Dmitry Medvedev, but everyone understood at that point that Medvedev was just a placeholder because in Russian constitution you couldn't do more than 2 terms, um, and then you cannot get third. But if there is a gap, then you can start another one. And then constitution was amended, which actually upset a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Also, what Putin said, and that's his administration, that's his government. They raised the retirement age, and that also was upsetting for a lot of people because you have to understand, even though Russia has free healthcare, the life expectancy is less than in the West, and especially for men. Men work hard in long hours, and if they leave to retirement, that's good. But then you raise that age, and essentially that off people from of the money. So that was upsetting for a lot of people. With regard to that Putin fights corruption, I mean, on the surface, yes, some of the corruption, was toned down. I see some of the corruption was toned down in police departments, because even a few years ago when I was in Russia, it was bad. So you could just bribe like regular policeman. Now you can get in trouble for that. You can actually get a jail time for even attempting. So you can try. I mean, some of them would still probably take bribes, but that can land you, some jail time. So and you never know. So, but there's still a lot of corruption. With regard to corruption, we don't need to go further than Shoigu and his family. Please understand that Shoigu's daughter is managing some companies that have government contracts and billions of, if not trillions of rubles. So it is a very corrupt family, and that family right now is on the spotlight. I really don't understand how this can happen. A lot of politicians that surround Putin, they have wives or kids in NATO countries, or they have citizenship of NATO countries. So, I mean, a lot of people who talk about Russian-Ukraine war, they don't talk about this stuff, but I think it's important. So I see that Putin is he's not a monster as people paint him, because I would like to see that man, honestly. But what I can see is he was lied to too many times, and he just disregarded that. So with grain deal recently, right? With Minsk agreement, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, right? The agreements that were made between Ukraine and Russia that were basically disregarded by both Russia and that just bought time for Ukraine to prep for the war. And so Putin is so the Western countries, they lie to Putin. Ukraine lies to Putin, and then he does what? He just carries on. So I'm just puzzled why this is happening. I understand that Putin is not the only one that runs Russia, so it's not like just one. There, there are a lot of oligarchs in Russia close to power, and if Putin just starts, hurting them, they can just kill them, kill him. That's what I sensed. What is going on? So there's some division between politicians. So they're called Kremlin towers. So there are liberals in Russia that would like the war to stop. They would rather Russia than win. There are some hawks that just more conservative politicians. Like what you can see in Surovikin, right? Really like hawks that they just want to go to Poland, right? To the western border. So they don't care. So, and these people constantly fight. So Putin is balancing between all of them. So it's not just.
Do you think Putin has done a good job exposing the Western elite and exposing the bankers, the Rothschild, the Rockefellers, and all of that?
I mean, it's hard to tell if he did a good job. I'm just upset that he did nothing for the last 8-9 years. I expected more from the person who is just this secret KGB at the top of KGB. He's a president, and he's a tyrant. He can kill. He can poison. He just he can do so. He can probably, as Western media said, they that elect president of the United States. Imagine that such a powerful man.
Do you
But in
think he could
reality,
do you think he could do that, or do you think that's just Western
of
lies?
course not. No, of course not. It's just I'm being just sarcastic. I just wish that he conducted the entire conflict with Ukraine differently. But I understand he doesn't get all of the information from the front. People who are in his close circle, I feel like they lie to him, because I like from the he did with the bloggers, some things that he said, I just they were factually untrue. And I'm like, okay, well, someone is clearly just giving him this information. So he's old. So but at the end of the day, if there's election tomorrow in Russia, there's no candidate. That's the thing. There's no candidates, and that also, I think just Putin and United Russia Party, they don't want to see some competition. They don't want people to be in the way. So please understand that Navalny was not real competition. I know that a lot of people in the West, they crying about Navalny. Navalny was not the man that he was supposed to. I mean, when people ask like, oh, you don't like Navalny, you probably like Putin. No, I don't like both. So I think Russia deserves a better man. I think there is some Russian.
Who would you pick? Who would you pick?
That's the thing. I don't see a candidate. And since when I immigrated to the United States, I never participated in this in the election again. I have that right. I still have that right. I can go to the embassy, to the consulate, and I can just cast my vote. I don't do that because if I immigrated, why should I have a say in how Russians live? They have to decide if they live in Russia. The Russians that live in Russia, they have to decide what's best for them. But I'm just upset that there is no, like, as I said before, in the United States you can see several
Mm-hmm.
politicians vying for the same spot, right? You have several Democrats, you have several Republicans, and how come Russia, with such good education system, with scientists, engineers, and there's no one but Putin?
There is, but Putin has a very high approval rating.
Yeah, he has, because you don't have anybody else. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
that's true. They do have elections in Russia, but obviously they want to support Putin, and I think he's the best leader in the world. I
because
think he's done an amazing job for Russia, and yeah. Sorry, Julie, you
they
there?
vote
Can you hear me?
because they had the same man for 20. Yeah, so they vote for him because they had the same man for 20 years. People really don't want to see drastic changes. They've seen what happened in Ukraine. They've seen what happened in Belarus, because there was an attempt of Maidan in Belarus. So they see that stuff. They don't want drastic changes. They see the life improving, and life in Russia is improving. I mean, I can tell you from my recent trips to Russia, night and day, from comparing to the time that when I left. But at the end of the day, people have to have a choice. If they decide that it's Putin, out of these 10 candidates, even like 5 candidates, okay, 3, that's fine. That's fine by me. But at least there is a choice. And on one hand, Russians do have a choice, right? So they
do. Russia's a federation democracy. What if it is? Federation democracy, like I said.
Yeah, they really don't. Right. But at the same time, they don't really have a choice, because when they go see the ballot, there's Putin and there is Communist Party that is basically irrelevant right now. There is LDPR party, it's Liberal Democrats, party of Zhirinovsky. if you remember him. That's a very famous politician. He died last year. Um, and then there's, I think, a couple of tiny, tiny parties that nobody even heard about.
Yep.
So
And
who else? Of course, about Putin, because it did rather see continuation of what's going on.
mhm. Julia, what is your opinion on? Sorry, so Julia, when you look at that, what do you? Okay, now right now, as we are seeing the de-dollarization of the United States dollar. The United States, of course, is losing its world dominance militarily and socially. With the rise of BRICS, like when you look at BRICS, Russia, China, and the Middle Eastern countries rising, what do you think, just in your opinion, what do you think the world is going to be like multipolar, with China and India and Russia perhaps being the world superpowers? And what do you think the world's going to be like with the United States no longer being the world superpower?
I think that the de-dollarization will continue. It's not going to happen overnight. I mean, I certainly don't want it to happen overnight. I mean, I live in a Western country, so, but I just understand that it's overnight. It will lead to a lot of misery. So, and I don't want that. At the same time, I think the dollar will just continue losing its dominance, and we'll see this multipolar world, because a lot of countries, especially countries that have been abused for years, if you look at
Mhm.
Africa, if you look at the countries in the Middle East,
Oh yeah, like Iran, Afghanistan,
yeah,
Iraq, Algeria,
like,
especially with Colonel Gaddafi wanting to make his own gold standard.
yeah, yeah. So, and these countries, they see what's going on. They see Russia standing up. They see, that the masks are off. To be frank, to a degree, I kind of appreciate that the masks are off, because I don't want the masks just continue to lie to Putin and to Russians, and just say that they wish them well when they clearly don't. They continue to support Ukraine and just fight Russia with the hands of Ukrainians, which is unfortunate. I'm thankful that they stop pretending. That's the first. That's the first step to resolve the issue in the first place. So, and I think that it will continue. This process will continue, because just too many people just see what's going on,
Mhm.
and I see the same process happening in the United States. I see a lot of people just lost trust in the government. They lost trust in these agencies,
Oh, absolutely.
with two-tier system, with what you see how elections are being conducted, and
Well,
I
The United States has one of the worst election laws in the world. In fact, elections in the United States have been rigged, probably since 1864. Sorry, election fraud has been happening since 1864. All we've been seeing in the last 20 years, election fraud has just been getting worse and worse and worse. And if anything, the United States has not been a constitutional republic since 1913 from the Federal Reserve Act, which turned it into more of a corporation. And then 9/11 came in, the Civilian Act came in, and yeah, and then especially the leaked video we saw, Julia, of James O'Keefe exposing the BlackRock person. Did you see that?
yeah, yes, I watched that, and to be frank, it was not surprising to me, because I already knew what BlackRock is. I watched him pull a lot, so he kind of talks about this a lot, and his guests discuss it. So I kind of what they're up to, but just seeing this man just gleefully saying these things, and just admitting what a lot of people who were called conspiracy theorists, that they were right. Uh,
Yeah, they were.
and he's just gleefully admitting that, and just saying, well, we just can buy politician up, we can just do this, we can do that, we just basically control everything. um that's just I don't know. It's just very really surprising. Like, if you ask me if I was shocked, I was not, because I've seen so much in the past year, and I've been doing research and following politics for years, so it's just something that I just accept and move on. It's also kind of scary to think about this, when you just where you're not surprised by it, when you're not scared by it, when you're just like, well, this is what we knew all along, just carry on, and this corruption right now is just so blatant and so open. What's going on in stock market, for example, and you can't even imagine the amount of corruption over there. It's just a lot of people just lost a lot of money because of it. They're trying right now to do some protests because Wall Street is just robbing them, essentially.
Mhm.
Just small retail investors. And I think it can continue on until some point, because people are not just going to be fine with this. The inflation is high, the economic situation is not ideal, and when you look at purchasing power, right, what people can actually buy with what they make, I mean, at some point, I think that up. And when revolutions happen, nothing good comes out of it, honestly.
Hmm.
Um, but we'll see.
Julia, before we finish up, I have one question. What what things would you say Russia does better than America socially, economically, and in healthcare? And what things do you think America could learn from Putin and Russia?
I would say about education, how how I got my education in Russia and how I got education here. And it's certainly it's more quality education in Russia, even though education in Russia worsened comparing to Soviet Union. It's still the amount you can learn, and it's actually on point on subject. We don't talk about politics as in American schools, right? So when I went to college, professors were just constantly talking about politics, which blew my mind, because I'm like, okay, I came to study something. Why would you talk about Trump, right? So in Russia, teachers, they don't talk about Putin or politicians, not because they can't. It's just because they came to teach a certain subject. So education, and it's affordable. You have a right to free education in Russia, one higher education in Russia. So you can graduate from university for free if you do on tests well enough, because certainly there's some competition, right? So with healthcare, I wish, you know, I wish that United States healthcare system was different. And I worked in healthcare when I immigrated here for a certain amount of years, and I just know how the system operates and works. And I don't see it, like I would like to see a solution how to fix it, but it's very expensive, and it's just simply unaffordable for many. So you have to either make no money at all, or if you make like if you're middle class, you have to pay essentially one rent per month extra to for the health insurance, and then you're on the hook for some co-payments and deductibles and everything else, so you pay a lot. Or you have to find a job that provides that benefit, and people just don't know what to do. And that's, I think, there were reports that it's number one cause of bankruptcy in America: healthcare bills, because they're so expensive. And I've seen them. I mean, sometimes if your healthcare provider does not process your insurance and they accidentally send you the bill, it's just thousands of dollars for simple lab work.
Mm.
And obviously it's not cost like that.
It's
It's
ridiculous, the healthcare bills in America.
in Russia. What I like, it's like healthcare system. Yeah, so in Russia, healthcare system, because it's cheap, and so understand that not everything that Russian government pays for, right? So certain things you have to pay for, but it's certainly affordable. And at the same time, the doctors, when you come to them, they don't view you as as a business, right? As a business
Mm.
client. They have different standards, different policies, and you know, I just wish that United States had some similar system. I don't think that in America you can implement fully funded by the government healthcare, right? What Democrats want, they want Medicare for all. I don't think it's feasible. I don't think it's gonna work, but it can be done. It can be affordable. It can be done. Um, we just need to elections that are enough, that are willing to do the work. I think that's what I would like to see here.
Hmm. So we better finish up now, Julia. I just want to say, is there anything else you would like to say?
No, we pretty much covered everything. You even asked me what I cooked, which certainly got me by surprise. I would have prepared some recipes.
That's pretty funny. Where can people find you, Julia?
They can find me on Twitter. I'm most active on Twitter, really. Sometimes I join spaces, and I talk about Russia-Ukraine conflict. We dive a little bit into history, some recent news. Sometimes I tweet something that's really important. I don't tweet a lot, but I try to share information that is really important. I don't do well with maps and all that stuff that all scenes do. There are some accounts that like to point these arrows and just say, well, Russia gained 2 kilometers, like Ukraine gained 1 kilometer, and I don't do that stuff. So, but I like to talk about this stuff on spaces, and share the knowledge, because I certainly gained a lot of knowledge over the years, because I've been following this conflict since 2014, really, and watched so many heartbreaking stories and interviews that it just changed the way I view this conflict. That's why when I comment on this period, just 1 year, right, of war, I view it differently than people just who find out what Ukraine is just a year ago, right? So because I've been following this and watching it constantly for the past 9 years at this point, right? Um, and It's complicated. It's complicated conflict. It's not black and white. It's not easy, and unfortunately, the resolution will not be easy either. But as I said, it's going to be tragedy for both Ukraine and Russia. But I think at some time in the future, and that's not going to be tomorrow, that's not going to be in 5 years or 10 years, Russia and Ukraine will be close enough to overview what happened, and come to terms with this. There are certain things that I don't agree with what the Russian government does. I certainly don't agree with what the Ukrainian government does either. But it's a very complex conflict. You can't just say, well, this side is right and this side is wrong. It's very complicated.
So yeah,
That's
thank you
probably
very.
it.
Mhm. So thank you very much, Julia, for coming on my show. It was a pleasure having you. I really enjoyed this time with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I, you know, this is the first probably stream I got into the past few weeks. So, but that was very surprising to me. But I enjoy talking about this stuff and sharing my knowledge. The only thing I want is just to share the truth. I might have some opinions that people might, disagree with, and that's fine. That's totally okay. I certainly like to hear about other people's opinion, but at the end of the day, there are certain facts, certain things that happen that I don't like when people lie about them. If that happened, I have to tell it. And if Western media doesn't talk about this for whatever reason, they don't want, or they're not comfortable, or they just simply don't know, well, maybe it's my job to talk about this and tell, well, this is what happened. Because people have to, learn the truth. And if after I present them the facts, after I tell them the truth that this is what happened, if they choose to stand with the Ukrainian government, so be it. That's their choice. But at least I tried. At least I want them to view other facts and the other information that they can't really find easily. Because understand that whatever Western media, even if they're pro-Russian, if whatever information they get, it's filtered. They can't get everything that is written in Russian-speaking hemisphere, right? So it's like what Ukraine or Belarus or Russia was writing about this stuff, what happened, certain facts. They can't get everything. So, and maybe if I can tell that, and I can back up my claims, I can certainly show proof. If people listen, I'm glad.
Well, thank you for coming on my show, Julia. It was a pleasure having you. Please, ladies and gentlemen, go check Julia out on Twitter. She's very talented, very smart when it comes to politics, especially Russia, Ukraine. Very smart young girl, very nice, really enjoyable to talk to. I really enjoyed it. So please give her, the support she deserves. And yeah, God bless you all, everybody. Thank you for joining the Welsh Republic Podcast, episode 115 today. Take care. Stay safe, everybody, and goodbye. Bye.